Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Mark Green, diabetes specialist dietitian. If you're watching on YouTube, then welcome. But make sure if you are watching there that you still check out the blog, diabetesdietguide.com, where we have a bunch of free information all about diabetes to help you manage your condition. We also offer programs, particularly for type 2, and at the time of filming, a weight loss program is being put together to show you exactly what you need to do in order to manage your diabetes or your weight, diet plans, educational videos, the whole shebang to show you exactly what you need to do to get the best outcomes. Now today we are talking about fat. Now I previously talked about different types of fat and the effect on health, but actually what I haven't yet done is actually show you what the different types of fat are and actually how they all relate together when we eat them and actually what's happening in your body, because it can be very confusing. So you may have heard of this word, triglycerides, when you've gone to see your consultant and they have said your triglycerides are okay, your triglycerides are up. But no one really actually explains what a triglyceride is compared to other fats like saturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, monounsaturated fat. How do they all relate to each other? And really all we need to do is just look at a little bit of the chemistry, which isn't overly too complicated, so just bear with me. So triglycerides in their first instance are the fat that you store in your body. So if you're carrying a bit of timber around the midsection, in those fat sacs, that's triglycerides. That is the active component that we use for energy, okay? Now, the way these are made up is we have a backbone, and we call this glycerol. So glycerol is a backbone, don't worry too much about the name, but attached to this backbone is fatty acids. And we have lots of different fatty acids. So as I've already said, you have saturated fatty acids, you have monounsaturated fatty acids, you have polyunsaturated fatty acids. And each of those different types of fatty acids will have a different effect on health, and in particular your cardiovascular disease risk. And tri means we have 3 of them. So 3 fatty acids attached to the glycerol. So that's the first thing. Triglycerides are the active form of fat in your body, which we will use for energy. They're made up of a glycerol backbone, of which there will be 3 fatty acids, and they can be saturated, monounsaturated, or polyunsaturated. So how does this relate to health? Well, it all starts with when we eat fat. So we'll eat something fatty, and then the digestion process begins in the stomach. We'll release bile and lipase, anything that ends in A's means enzyme. And these are designed to help emulsify and break up the fat. Now we find it very hard as humans to digest fat in the conventional way as we would with carbohydrates and protein, because fat is what we call hydrophobic. It means that fat does not like water. If you took a glass of water and poured fat into it, some oil for example, you'd see the fat rises to the top and forms a layer on the top of the water. And that's because it doesn't like water. And seeing as blood is mostly water, it makes it very difficult for fat to be transported through the blood and follow the usual digestion pathway. So the body gets clever. From this emulsified fat substance, it packages it into what we call chylomicrons. You may have heard that term before. And all chylomicrons are little balls of protein that carry fat around to the liver in order for the fat to then be distributed to where it's needed. So chylomicrons transfer to the liver, and think of the liver almost as like a control center that distributes energy to where it needs to go. Now we enter the liver, and this is where we start to see the effect on health and some other terms that you're probably familiar with. So the liver will distribute the fat to where it's needed, i.e. it's kind of like a catering manager in the sense that it will say, table 9 needs some energy, so I'm going to send it over there. Table 9 being potentially some muscles that are doing active aerobic work, for example. So, but we already know that fat cannot just be distributed in the blood as a normal fat, as a triglyceride. So what we do is we package the fat once again into another substance. So we take the triglycerides and we put it into things called lipoproteins. And you may not have heard that word before, but you may have heard such words as HDL, LDL, and VLDL. So that is cholesterol, okay? So not only will triglycerides be in these protein balls, they will also contain cholesterol. So it's just our body's way of distributing energy around the body in order to give it what it needs without fat having to travel in the blood because it doesn't like the water. So it starts with things called very low density lipoproteins. So the reason they are very low density is because there's a lot of triglycerides in them. And because the fat rises to the top of the water glass, it makes it very low density because water is more dense, but there's more fat in it. Then these start to travel around the body and basically distribute the triglycerides where they're needed, which means that the level of fat starts to reduce, meaning we are left with more protein and more cholesterol, and ultimately it starts to reduce the density. So it goes from very low density through to just low density. So low density lipoproteins. Now LDL cholesterol is the one that you may be familiar with as being the bad cholesterol. But also these very low density lipoproteins would also be considered the bad cholesterol, but only if they exist in abundance. Everyone will have a certain amount, so we're just trying to control them in a certain range. Now in diabetes, we are particularly interested in LDL cholesterol because the risk of cardiovascular disease is much greater compared to the general population. So if these are in excess, we know LDL is linked to cardiovascular problems, we know diabetes is linked to cardiovascular problems, and this is where that double whammy begins. So that's how this happens. Now, meanwhile, these LDL particles, once they're finished, will be circling around in the body, and they will be picked up in the liver again via receptors and recycled. So the triglycerides will get put back into storage or where they need to go. Hold that thought. Meanwhile, we also have slightly different lipoproteins called high-density lipoproteins. Now these have a very small amount of fat in them and have a slightly different job from these. So the low-density lipoproteins distribute the energy, whereas the high-density ones go around and collect surplus triglycerides from the circulation and return it to the liver. So this is actually more of a clearance lipoprotein. So this is why we think of HDL as a good cholesterol. Okay, so we have good and bad. Now, returning to our fatty acids on our glycerol backbone. Depending on the type of fat, whether it's saturated, trans, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, they will have a different effect on several different mechanisms. One theory is that actually certain fats, i.e. saturated fat, increases the rate at which very low density lipoproteins will be produced. Another theory is that a high intake of saturated fat actually starts to block these receptors, meaning that less low density lipoproteins, or LDL, is recycled in the liver, which means ultimately the overall amount of these starts to increase. Now, it's typically seen that only in circumstances of extreme excess of fat intake, or when people are in a very positive energy balance and gaining weight, that we start to see this mechanism happen. Okay? Whereas mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids help to reduce these because they upregulate the receptors to help clear the LDL, meanwhile creating scenarios where they do not touch the HDL, particularly the polyunsaturated fats. The monounsaturated fats. Monounsaturated fats do not affect HDL cholesterol, but they push down LDL cholesterol. Polyunsaturated fats reduce HDL cholesterol, but they also reduce LDL cholesterol, so your total cholesterol is reduced. So just the different types of fats that you'll be having can make a difference. Now in terms of where we find these foods, so saturated fat is your animal products. Meat, cheese, dairy will typically be the types of foods where you're finding saturated fat, whereas the mono and polyunsaturated fats is more like your olive oils, rapeseed oils, nuts, seeds, fish, avocados, and foods that you probably more commonly associate with being healthy. So actually just shifting the balance from a primarily trans or saturated fat diet to a mono and polyunsaturated fat diet can actually help reduce your cholesterol levels, your LDL cholesterol levels, and also then reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease, particularly in diabetes where it is so important. And that's it, guys. So I hope that's cleared some things up, and now you can tell the difference between a triglyceride, a saturated fat, a polyunsaturated fat, a monounsaturated fat, and hopefully just give you a bit more information. Remember, check out the blog if you want more information or if you need a helping hand, diabetesdietguide.com. I'm going to do more blogs, so I will see you next time.